Welcome to part 3 of Memories of Oswego County, a roundtable sharing of experiences of the days gone by. The title, Memories of Oswego County, is copyrighted by John R. Byard, the narrator, and cannot be used without permission of the copyright holder. This portion is taped by SAVE, S-A-V-E, SAVE Video Productions for rebroadcast. The participants in this series volunteer their services with the hopes that sponsors may be found to support the costs of future programs. Write me at Post Office Box 62, New York, 1306-0624, or call 593-1306. Our purpose is to preserve this oral history for future generations, to learn about their roots, and as a source of historical information for ready reference. All the past is prologue. Come with me, then, back through memory lane to a world not like today, to a time when most people walked to work and the machinery of the factories was run by water power. Come with me to Hunterarms 50-some years ago, where they made guns that were known all over the world. With me tonight is Bob Volpe on my left, who lives outside of Fulton a few miles. Bob is a skilled woodworker who has been doing custom work at his shop since retiring after 22 years with Black Clawson. Some of his precision work can be seen in many of the churches of Fulton, the Scruple Mansion, and the new Beachshire restaurant, now the Carlton. He worked at Hunterarms from 1942 to 1950. John Zarekny was a gun repairman at Hunterarms from 1945 to 1951, but he could not be with us tonight. And taking his place is Fern Parsons, the town historian of the town of Valney. And Fern will tell her about her father when he worked at the arms. John Zarekny was a veteran of World War II who took on the job training there after being discharged. Rich Beyer, on my left, is a owner of Beyer Offset Printing in Palermo. He is a gun collector and is most knowledgeable about firearms. John Hunter Sr. of Sterling Valley managed to accumulate a considerable amount of money while he was raising a family of 6 sons and 1 daughter. He set out to form a family manufacturing enterprise in which all the family could play an important role. In 1888, he formed the Hunterarms Company and built a 3-story factory on the corner of Hubbard and Ontario Streets in what is now the city of Fulton. The Hunters had many other local factories, including the Battle Island Pulp and Paper Mill, but the most well-known was the Hunterarms. The Hunterarms survived as the rest of their empire fell apart. Bob, would you show the Hunterarms poster reproduction? I think Bob Terry has already done that. And explain about how that was.
This is not an original speech. It's a reproduction that was brought to me from Ohio. But it's typical of what I used to see in the gunworks along the walls. And it was primarily their advertising to go into hardware stores and gun shops throughout the Northeast. There were many other versions of this. This is the only one I have at the present time. Want to go to the next one?
Yeah, would you show the photo of the exterior of the original 4-story building?
Right. This is a picture of the original Hunterarms plant. This picture was taken from what would be North 1st Street, where Black Clawson sits now. The original building was 4 stories. After they got into making guns, they decided to add a 5th story to the building. And that was the start of their downfall. The 5th story was added for storage, work area, and many heavy machinery pieces were put up there. And then on top of that, there is a small, this is a view of the 5-story right there. They put on a water tower. This building was approximately 400 foot long by 75 foot wide and 5 stories high. And was all brick with a wood frame interior. The weight of that water tower caused the building to sway and bend. And over the years, it bent to the east, so that when they shut down in 1950, from the roof to the ground was out of plumb 36 inches on that building. All that kept it from going down was the fact that in their manufacturing, they had long line shafts inside of the building that acted just like springs. So wind would blow the building and it would come back and forth. And as long as it was doing that, they weren't too worried about it. Then in 1949, they had a section of floor cave in on them, and that was the beginning of the downfall. The state came in, questioned them about it, and started looking at the building. They repaired the floor, got back into production, but within 2 years, they were out of there.
Bob, excuse me. Could you explain about the water power and how they got?
The original power source for running the gunworks was taken from the old canal, which went on the east side of the gunworks. There was a channel coming down from First Street that the boats used to go up. And off at the end of the gunworks, there was a flume to take the water down to a water wheel, and then under the building. And that race ran the entire length of that building, went down and under First Street and came out in the river. And the only thing you can see of it today is the guardrails on the bridge where it went under First Street.
Oh, thank you, Bob. You're covering that now? You've got that all covered? Go ahead.
And I got a picture here of the work area that shows the line shafts and the pulleys. And this is about what I remember when I first came in there in 1942. It was a maze of belts, pulleys, and in it was all machinery. Some floors did not have all the shafting down through, but this is how they transferred that power from that water wheel to these line shafts. Eventually, with electric motors, the water wheel was replaced. You want to go on with that?
Yeah, I would like to get, you can take a break for a minute if you want. You want to take a little break for a minute?
Okay.
All right. Fern, I understand that your father worked there for a few years. Could you tell us a little about that?
Well, I was young, but he knew Charlie Fenner, who was, I believe, like
He was a
superintendent there. And he got talking to my dad and told him that if he'd been through grade school out in the West where he was born, but he'd not had high school with the math that he would have gotten, so he did a math course at night at the Fulton High School. And then he went on to work at Hunterarms and Remington Rand and Dilts after that. But he worked in Lloyd Du Bois, who lives on the Silk Road. He used to work there. And I'm sorry Joe Smith can't be here tonight because he's a good friend.
Joe got the flu.
He has the flu, and he worked there too, Bob told me. I hadn't realized that.
Yeah.
But I was always very proud of my dad and the work that he did.
Fine. Thank you. Rich, would you show us your ideal grade Hunter shotgun?
Sure. Just a
And
question.
explain the features of it and anything you'd like to add about the other Hunter guns.
Okay, fine. Just going to ask you, what did your father do there? Did you mention that in the...
Yeah, he was a tool maker.
Just a tool, it was a tool.
They were great for jigs and fixtures.
It was funny you mentioned Charlie Fenner. Another ex-employee, Al Van Sanford, who was since dead, mentioned that Charlie Fenner used to take great pride in his job, and even in the bad weather, if it was really bad, he had a big Buick. He used to drive around town. In the snowstorms, he even go and pick the employees up to make sure that they got there. This is an ideal grade LC Smith. This was the type of gun that would be engraved by either Ollie Warthol, Charlie Jarrett, not necessarily Kraus. He was saved. Al Kraus was Hunterarms master engraver. And the Smith gun started out, let's take it back to the beginning. Their standard gun was called a field grade. Then the next grade up was an ideal grade. And then they had a specialty grade, and then they had a crown grade, and then they had a series of higher grades going all the way up through. The highest grade would be a deluxe. Now, that was type of engraving was done by a man, Al Kraus, who was their master engraver, of course, and I imagine Bob will get into that a lot more. But Al Kraus, well, for example, let's leave Al for a minute and get back to the case coloring. Part of what made a Smith gun was the quality of the way it was put together and the fact that supposedly it would never shoot loose. The more you used a Smith gun, supposedly it would just keep getting tighter and tighter and tighter, and it would very seldom they would ever get to the point where they would be unsafe to be fired. They took great pride in that. They took also great pride in their distinctive case coloring, color case hardening, and that was done by another employee, Sam Sherman. Well, he was probably not the only one that did it, but he certainly was one of them. And he had it down to a fine science. Yeah. The tricky part of this was Al Kraus, that engraver, would a lot of times inlay gold into the receivers of these guns, 2 or 3 different color golds. It'd be yellow gold, orange gold, and green gold for like the hat on a hunter and things like that. And in order to achieve this color case hardening, the temperatures required were almost to the degree that gold melts. So it was very, very critical that they didn't get the things too hot, or else Al Kraus might spend 3 months, for instance, putting gold into the receiver of one of these guns, and in a flash it would melt out of the firearm. So that color case hardening was a very precise formula. How they heated it in various containers with charcoal and things like that, and at a certain point, when it got to a certain temperature, they would take all these color case hardened parts and they would quench them in water. And part of the way they got the color was not only how fast they quenched it, but what they had in the water and in the temperature of the water. And I'm not positive, but I think I recall Sam Sherman mentioning to me that they even had water bubbling through their quench. I wasn't sure. Did you ever hear that story, Bob?
No, but
Yeah.
what gave it the color?
It
was a bone meal.
It was the bone meal.
Yep.
Wrapped, in the charcoal.
Yep.
And that supposedly gave it the color, but Smith guns had a distinctive color. And each company had their own method of doing this color case hardening. So anyway, as far as the engraving goes, this is the first grade up. And this, I said, mentioned would be done by either Ollie Warthol or Charlie Jarrett, back at the time that I knew, in the 40s, I would assume. And it was amazing how great engravers they were. Now, I know Charlie mentioned to me that, I'll set this down so you get a fairly close look at the engraving that's on that his job was to do 6 of those guns a day. And he said towards the end, he was actually able to do his 6 guns a day, and Ollie Warthol was another engraver there, and still have time to do piecework. They could earn extra money when they got above and beyond their own daily quota of what they had to do in doing additional engraving or other things. And these deluxe, the highest grade guns that as Al Kraus would engrave, would take up to almost a year at times. And what Al would do would be to come up with these sketches and mail them back to the people to see if they liked what he was going to put on them, and then he would go ahead and do the engraving. But a lot of the original work on the gun was done by either Charlie Jarrett or this Ollie Warthol. Some of the preliminary work, so that Al didn't have to work on one particular gun for the whole year. He would work on probably 3 or 4 different guns in the course of a week or something like that. And it was very, very exacting, demanding, close work. Now, excuse me for a second. This is a picture right here of Al Kraus. He came up from Syracuse to Hunterarms. I'm afraid I don't know the year. I asked Charlie Jarrett before he died, and unfortunately I don't either. He never mentioned, or I forgot the year that he came up. You never knew, did you, Bob?
Well, the original engraver for L.C. Smith in Syracuse was a guy by the name of Zahn.
Yeah, yeah.
And his boy, and then when he came to Fulton and worked a while with, and Al Kraus came when they came to Fulton.
Yeah.
But
I didn't know the year.
he was a very exacting engraver, and the government used to keep track of, because
Yeah.
he originally engraved money plates
Yeah.
for the government.
But I remember Charlie Jarrett, who was Al Kraus's one of his best friends, mentioning how when Al tried to come up here from Syracuse, he came, I guess, in the middle of the winter, and got snowed in 2 or 3 times along the way. But as I mentioned, its engraving was extremely demanding, close work. And for relaxation, the company would pick him up in their limo or whatever it was and pack a lunch, and they would take him out into the various areas of this countryside close there, and he did a lot of paintings, a lot of landscapes and things, and he occasionally would do dogs. And he particularly, on his guns, his particular specialty were ducks, woodcock, and grouse. And so he would love to somehow incorporate either a woodcock or a grouse in on his dog paintings. One characteristic of Al Kraus's paintings that most people may not know, and I would never have known except that Charlie Jarrett mentioned it to me, and another friend of Al Kraus's is Ken Sweet, who lives in Phoenix. And both of them mentioned how Al would always put one, and if a bird was in a dog's mouth, he would always have one drop of blood coming out near the eye in red, and he would always put that in red. And he always used to kid Charlie Jarrett or Ken Sweet, saying that that bird was got with the golden BB, the one BB in the shell that hit that bird. And it was a characteristic of Al's. And he painted probably 100 or 200, I would say, probably paintings, wouldn't you?
They estimate about 200.
Yeah, and they had raffles and for some of his paintings and things like that. And I guess when he first came to the Gunworks, he wasn't very popular as an engraver. There was a bit of rivalry, I understood, there, and they put him, I think Charlie said, underneath the stairwell or something, is where he first started to engrave. But gradually he rose up through the ranks, and he was, by the time he was through, he was the 4th greatest engraver in the world. These were some of his pattern sketches that he would make before he would engrave a gun, and he would mail those out to the prospective people, or he would just sort of do it for his own, so he could come up with something that was a scheme of things that he really would like. Here is a picture of a deluxe L.C. Smith. Unfortunately, I don't have a real deluxe myself, but if you can pan in on that, you'll see some of the exotic gold work that he would do in on the receiver of some of his guns. And depending upon how much money the client had and whatever they wanted, he could more or less incorporate it in onto the gun. But he was a master in the amount of gold that he could put in.
He wants to work this, excuse me.
Sure.
He wants to work this.
Let's pass it back over to Bob then. Or do you want Bob?
You're doing pretty good.
You're doing good.
Oh, okay. Well, he
tell
also,
us about these two right here.
the
Okay.
guns, he was such a master in the wood, in the metal end of it, but at the same time, not to be outdone while I'm thinking of him, whoever did, there was a gentleman named Garfield Snyder who did all the stock work. Now, these is a picture of Charlie Jarrett there, Garfield Snyder, and Al Kraus. And between the 3 of them, they made some of the finest guns there was in the world. So much so that even presidents and everybody else wanted some of their guns. Here's an example. It's just as masterful as Al Kraus was in the metal end of the firearms. Snyder was the master of woodworking. He uses the detail and the checkering was just absolutely astounding, the quality that he could put in his. To this day, I have never seen checkering that would point up to his quality. Even some of the finest British firearms made today, his checkering and woodwork is second to none. Their quality was so great that even presidents and noted people would want Smith guns. Here's one, for instance, that was done for Annie Oakley. She had 2 or 3 of his, of Smith guns. President Garfield had weapons made. John Philip Sousa had the only gold-plated L.C. Smith known to exist. Yes, one picture of it. And over here, and Mrs. Sousa ordered this gun for him. He was a great bird hunter and lover of firearms himself, but he had the gun 6 months, and she wrote back to the company saying that my husband loves the gun so much, and it is so beautiful that he's afraid to carry it into the field. Can you make me a duplicate gun without the engraving and the same specifications so he can use it as a gun, an everyday gun? And he did. So there was 2 firearms made for him. Of course, other noted people who liked Smith guns was Clark Gable. And naturally, during the war, I guess that was even when you were there, wasn't it, Bob?
Just before.
Before he ordered them?
That went in 39,
Yeah.
somewhere around there.
You may possibly know more about that. I know he ordered a Crown Grade for himself and Carol Lombard, who was his great love in life.
The only other one I know of is Gene Autry had one.
Yes, Gene Autry.
That one.
And I know there were a lot more people, prominent people who had them. They made some of the rare guns. They made guns in 12, 16, 20, and 410. Supposedly for every 112 gauge, for every 500 12 gauges, they made 120. And for every 520s, they made 410, supposedly, is the story that I have heard over the years. They also, what most people didn't realize, is that they also tried to put in production a 28 gauge gun. And the only one that was known to exist is one that was owned by Claire Wadsworth. Now, who was Claire exactly in
Claire was the sister of the Hunter brothers. She was the youngest. She
Her
was
name-
sister to the
no,
5 original Hunter
Her name
brothers.
was
Werner.
Werner.
Yeah.
Claire was the husband.
Claire was the husband.
Okay.
But I mean, what relation did he have to the family? I mean, he wasn't a hunter himself.
No, she was.
Yeah, she was, yeah.
She was a Hunter.
But somehow he had the only 28 gauge Smith ever made. And here's 2 photographs of the gun which I obtained from Verna, probably when she was around 98 or 99 years old. And that is a one-of-a-kind gun as far as I know and have been able to find from collecting firearms for 40 years. I've never heard of a second one. And it's a real rarity among Smith guns, as are the 410s. They were very pretty, cute little gun, but for some reason they never seemed to make very many of them. The Smith gun of its day was not only a thing of beauty, it was a thing that the employees took a great deal of pride in making. And there's so much talk today of guns being bad and evil. Well, in those days, back, a Smith gun was like a knight in shining armor. A family during the Depression could take a low-cost L.C. Smith shotgun and give it to the boy of the family, and he could feed a family of 4 or 5 and without any problem, with rabbits, grouse, or whatever. And almost every store around this area sold Smith guns. As a matter of fact, where we are right now in Volney Center, right across the street where the motel is, was the general store. And an employee of mine, Vince Vant, who was a longtime member, the Vant family has owned a farm here in Volney for many, many years. His father, his grandfather, his father's father, went into that little corner store in 1910, and they sold Smith shotguns in a barrel. And they would stood up there, and they were $15 a piece. And his grandfather purchased one even then, and that's how he fed his family through the whole Depression. It's just a point in today how everybody seems to be poo-pooing firearms. This was an industry in Fulton that everybody was greatly proud of. And they served a very useful purpose. And they made a gun that would last for 100 years. And matter of fact, this person, Vince Vant, still has his grandfather's shotgun and still using it today. And that's a fine tribute to the quality of the firearm that was produced out there for a number of years. There's a lot of different things that the Hunter brothers, they basically were not knowledgeable in the gun collecting, in the gun manufacturing business as such. They were businessmen. And in order to promote their product, they would come out with various advertising gimmicks and different things, and they came out with paperweights and advertising pieces like that thing that Bob Welpe put
Excuse
up,
me, Rick, could you show them that little thing on your...
they made, among other things, the Hunter brothers tried a trial run of these stick pins. This came out of a home in Fulton, which was, I was fortunate enough to obtain a few years ago. It was stuck in a rack with a bunch of in a pin cushion with about 40 or 50 women's hat pins. And that's how I was able to purchase it. But it says Smith Guns on the front, and it was one of it says Hunterarms Company on the back, too, Fulton, New York. But it was just one of their various gimmicks to try to promote gun sales. Part of the demise of the Hunterarms gun manufacturing business was the advent of the pump and automatic shotgun. It seemed that the double gun fell out of favor when the pump shotguns came into vogue. And plus the fact the Smith gun was made in a company which was using obsolete power and old tools and things like that. It was only through the wonderful manufacturing skills of the employees there that the Smith guns lasted as long as they did. They never compromised their quality. It was just a wonderful gun. And to this day, they're still sought after almost worldwide. For instance, in the South, Smith guns are more popular than they are even here, and they command a higher value. They were very popular in the South. They made single triggers, even in try to cut protections. This particular gun has two triggers, but they had a single trigger model. And I remember Al Van Sanford, who was an employee there, mentioning to me and getting a kick out of it. The Hunter brothers, naturally, in order to try to cut production costs, I think it took, do you remember how long? It was either 3 or 4 hours to make yeah, 3 or 4 hours to make a set of single triggers, I think. Weren't you in single triggers too?
No, I worked next to them, but I never actually put it.
Yeah. Well, one day Al was mentioning to me that the company figured that was way, way too long. So they hired a consultant from England to come over to Special to try to cut the cost of manufacturing these single triggers. And they hired this, paid for his fare all the way over and everything else. And he spent 2 or 3 months trying to come up with various schemes to cut the production. And when he was all done, the Hunter brothers asked him for a demonstration, and after 4 months of trying to figure out ways to cut the cost and time, it took him almost double the amount of time as the average employee at Hunterarms did. So
there were 2 other guns that they marketed too.
Yes, why don't you mention that?
Well, the Fulton and were two other cheaper guns that put on the market. I can't tell you when they exactly started. But one was a Fulton gun, which was a box frame and no side plates. And it was strictly a family gun you'd go hunting with. And they had a Hunter Special, which I've heard many of the gun workers say that was the best gun they ever made because it had the Smith bolt in it. And the more you shot it, the tighter it got. It had a stronger stock in it because of the box frame.
Bob, could you tell us about the gun makers?
Yeah, the gun makers.
Gun makers. And I would just like to add something here. You told me once about the no smoking rule that they had there.
Yeah, I
people
told
think
you
no
about that this
smoking.
morning.
Well, would you tell the people that are listening here
I didn't worry.
about the no smoking? This is very good.
Being a completely wooden building, there was no smoking. But boy, there were chewers. And I mean chewers. Every post in the milling room had a spittoon, cast iron one. That way the cheapie. But on the second, third, and fourth floor, those spittoons were the old brass spittoons.
Now
And I got the,
tell us about where they dumped the spittoons and also where the toilets went.
well, all right, I can do it. But I was walking through the aisle one day when one of the maintenance supervisor was walking down the aisle, and he had to get rid of his tobacco. So he aimed for the spittoon, and his teeth and everything went right into the spittoon. And their men's room was something else. It was, the state made them eventually take it out. But they were a three-holer made out of Italian white marble. They were spotless. Cold, I'll tell you that. And that was the trick. They used to get somebody in there and they would...
Just so they understand about the water that came through the race, went on down underneath the building, and everything went right into out into the river. Right.
And this, where all their sewage and everything went down through. But we would catch somebody in there sitting there and light a piece of paper and wait for that water to come down through because they flushed by themselves, and he would get it. But the water that ran the water wheel went on down and under the building. It went the entire length and then on over First Street and into the river. And everything went in that race. I mean, the sawdust, all the sewage, everything.
And you were going to tell us about the barrel racks, or did we have a picture on the barrel rack?
Yeah, the barrel racks. Yeah. Okay, this... This is a picture of the old gunsmith. Somebody might be able to identify something. I could not identify any of them. It was taken around 1915. So that was a little bit before my time.
Bob, you told me that they contracted with a company and hired their own help.
That's right.
Is that right?
These would be what we would call it today group leaders. And they would contract with the company for so many guns in a year. You can't do it today, but they had contracts and they would go hire their own help, train their own help, and pay their own help. Each department head had his crew. The polishers, they had their crew. Milling machine downstairs, I understand, was strictly piecework. And you didn't get rich, but a lot of families lived out of there. I mean, it was enough. The wage was, you had to work, but you could get by with it.
Amazing.
Yeah. And this is a picture of the old gunsmith, and this is a picture, this is the final assembly upstairs where the guns were put together. And, yeah, that was the final assembly. And this shows the gun racks where they used to store the guns. In other words, each gun had a serial number. Every major part had that number on it. And you could not take the parts from one gun and put it into another one. But each major part had a number. It was in a little box. When you got all done, you shouldn't have any parts left over.
Now, you also told me about the dress code they had there. Do you
Yes.
want to talk about
Yeah,
that?
that was going to be some of the other guys that didn't show it, but
Yeah, well,
They're,
we'll have to take over for
they
that.
don't show it here too much. Well, they do here. They got their ties on. But those gunsmiths, when they came in the morning, usually when they were going to work in the bank, they come in with a suit, a tie, a hat, smoking a big cigar as far as the front door. They come in, they either had changed their clothes or someone would put on a big white apron, covered right up over the back all the way around, work all day, go home at night and they'd be spotless with a white shirt, a suit, just like a banker.
Sign of a good craftsman.
They were, yeah.
I was impressed what you told me about wanting to go to work. This is quite unusual in today's world.
That's true.
That they took pride in their work and they really
Pride.
wanted to go to work each
And
day.
every day was a different thing. It wasn't something you did. You were responsible for putting that gun together. And if you didn't stay. And your operation. And they had very, very little turnover. I mean, you know, it was the people took pride in their work and there was nobody coming around harassing you or pushing you and saying you gotta do this, you gotta do faster, and all of that. You did your work, you had so many guns to do in a day, and that was it. That's what it was thinking of.
Maybe you could mention to them a little bit when you were producing the guns, how you put things together with a soft fit and a hard fit, and
Yeah.
how some of those things would show. And some,
Well, that's
you
why,
mentioned some of the quality that the workman had, and how you would fit that spot on the water table.
yeah, well, I was showing Rich here tonight. He says this gun is tight. I said, the prisoner shot home. Because when we used to fit the action, we didn't have a stock or nothing. This full wood was off the forehead. And we would have to put it on the table and hook that into that little corner of that stock, that barrel right there, and that's what got the first fitting on it. In other words, that lets you get down to where you could get the forehead on, and then you would drill and ream the pin. And after that, you would have to keep letting this down to the water table. And we would keep it probably a 1/16 to 1/8 of an inch off of the water table so that you could see right under it. After the gun was case hardened, then they would have to be refitted because of the warpage. And that was my last job I had, was fitting the final on the action in the guns.
So that was a hard fit, they call
Yeah,
it.
hard, what they call a hard fit. Yeah, then I also did repair work, putting on new barrels. Somebody wanted new barrels or new forends. And it was, get my day's work done.
You got me
It was
right
30.
in sights there.
Yeah.
Thought you was in the Army. They teach you any better than that?
Yeah, they did, but down there, we all know.
You forget, don't you, right?
They do. No, you should never point a gun at a person.
All right, you also told me about this engraver, that he was so good
Oh, yeah.
that even, that they thought maybe at some time he did engrave money plates for the government.
He
And
was.
is it the FBI kept?
Yeah, they state, I've heard the government workers tell me
Sure.
that the government came about every 2 or 3 years.
Kept track of him, make sure
To
he was
keep track
still-
of what he was doing, because when he learned engraving,
What about the check rig process?
well, the checkering process is this grip right here. And you can get a shot of that, the lines on it. Got it? Well, basically, there's two lines. You got a line right that goes about just about horizontal to the barrel. Then you've got another set of lines that's about 45 degrees to it. And you have a pattern, you scribe the outside of it where you want the pattern to go. And then you've got a little tool that's got 3 little prongs on it. And I think there's 4, and they right follow one another. And you start, and you follow the line you did there, and then you come over 2, and then come over 2 more, because you trace 1 and cut 2. And that's what Joe Smith used to do. They have right in the saddle, and they would have to do about 10 guns a day.
That's absolutely astounding.
Yeah, yeah, and then they would put some oil on it. Generally, the stock was finished when they got it. Yeah.
10 guns a day.
Lost the stock or lost the frame, they had to take the barrels before and start all over again. This was all thrown away. You know, that was all thrown away.
Well, I suppose all good things should end, but I would like to know what you think about it transferred your story, transfer at different times of ownership of that, and finally what happened to it.
Well, the building was part of it. They had promised to stay in Fulton.
Did you tell me it was 36 inches out of plumb?
It was. It was from the top of the roof to the ground. It was out of plumb 36 inches. And all that kept it from going on over was the piping and the line shafts inside. And they acted like torsion bars.
There, right?
This building was constantly moving all the time.
Didn't you mention that the light above, when you were working in repair, it would come on and
That
off?
floor went down. I worked at a third floor, and right about 10 feet back of my bench, the floor went down 18 inches, right as that post. They had 5,000 gun stocks on the 5th floor piled right around the post. Wow. And they had milling machines, drill presses, all that stuff that they stored on that top floor. And it was just the weight of it, and the old foundations down below, they just wore out, that's it. Yeah. And they did a remarkable job of saving the rest of it. So Big Six Whitcomb was a contractor, and that roof was like a truss. And they went in and put fish plates on it. And then they run inch cables from that roof down to the first floor and round the beam and back up again. They had turnbuckles on every floor. And they had 2 of them down through and a man on every floor. And they just started turning those turnbuckles, and they lifted that floor back up and carried it till they could get a foundation and a new post in there. They did a remarkable job.
Oh, it was a remarkable company, and you know,
Yeah.
you could see how everything they did was through love and
Yeah.
determination, you know?
Yeah.
All right,
But,
you mentioned
the fact that it had that heavy rafter, let them do it.
you mentioned Big Six Whitcomb. I believe he was the same man that built what we call a Whitcomb track over on the west side.
He
Is
was
that-
one of them, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right, okay.
Yeah, he was one of them. Yeah.
Did you
Well,
like,
it was a good place to work. I mean, probably the best place I ever worked in, and I enjoyed it. I mean, I'd get up in the morning and go in there, and after I went to Black Cloth, it was good working, but it was a different atmosphere. There, it was just like one big family. You know? Everybody looked out for somebody else. Somebody got a little problem or something, somebody else knew the answer to it, we'd listen to it. Sure.
for the people that aren't up on history, you might explain about the old Oswego Canal, where it it started to take in a black turn approximately where the Lock 3 restaurant is now. Could you tell about that and how it went up by Hunterarms?
That, where the race used to come across the plaza there. You've seen pictures of the past where the bridge was over the
Well, this is
canal?
now near the Marine Midland Bank,
Yeah,
just to
well, it's
bring it up
right
to
there,
date.
right across.
Yeah.
It came over to Wall Street. There was a lock there at Wall Street. And then it went down and you had another lock at the gunworks. And then they had that basin that they used to store boats with, and in the wintertime it was also part of the main canal. But that canal went right on down till you get to the curve on 57. You can still see the old stone walls down there.
That is all Route 481 now.
481,
All
but
was
it's,
filled
yeah.
in as part of a WPA project during the Depression.
Yeah, they filled that in.
You would
But
never
at
know
the
there was a
gunworks,
canal there now.
They blocked off the end of the canal, and they diverted that water back. It still went down underneath. It went down under there before, but they weren't gates like you have today. They were just planks. And when Niagara Mohawk come in, and they had to replace the planks because they had the water rights to it, they had to take all that plank out. And they draw the old canal right down. But if they let it fill up again, urban renewal took away everything else.
Tell us about Frank Ash's private
Well,
generator.
there was a power station right to the top of First Street. There used to be a Plaza gas station there, and right behind that was a little hydro generator. The Victoria drew its water from this canal. And it used to go down through, and then, of course, it went back down through, and the Excelsior work was down below it. And then there was another branch that went over to the Volney Felt, and another branch went to the Dilts, down to the Knife Works. And when I went there in 1950 to Dilts, the water wheel was still being used. Every once in a while, our lights would get bright, and they'd go out, until they converted over to Niagara Mohawk. But there were channels all the way through there, under that road, and that could direct that water.
Did you mention exactly where Hunterarms was for these people? A lot of people probably didn't realize where it was.
Yeah, you could
It's still there.
Yeah, well, there's like in my best location of it is the gas station that's down there. That's just about that's the middle of it. And that medical building, that's where the Victoria paper mill was. And the driveway that went in to both of them, they both used the same driveway, is right opposite the one at the Burks. That their driveway were right opposite. Up where Burks parked their car now, that was 2nd Street. And but you come right across, and there was a railroad track. Went through there. They used to go south, and when the station was down by where Goldberg's is now, that was the O&W station. When I went through Fulton.
Amazing how it's changed.
There's some pictures around on that. I think John knows about that.
Did you want to tell about any more?
Well, the only thing that I was going to mention about, I know when they were building, after the gunworks was destroyed and they were leveling the ground, I guess they said they bulldozed actually almost thousands of pounds of parts and things are still in the ground right over there when everything was demolished. And I imagine quite a few collectors today would cringe if they knew how many parts were laying there rusting underneath that gas station where you mentioned,
That was one of the problems they had when they started the war work. The old machines had run so long in one place that they couldn't do the precision work required. We tried to make parts for this Arlington 20mm anti-aircraft gun, but they just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Well, they'd start out 1,000 parts. They'd wind up with about 500 pieces.
Yeah.
Where were the other 500?
Yeah.
They kept wondering where they were. One day somebody happened to go down underneath the building. They found them.
And that's where they were.
They would throw it down a rat hole or something.
Hunter also made a fan. Bob, would you explain where they moved that, where that was made?
Well, the Hunter fan was one of the Hunter projects, and that's up where the Osborne paper mill equipment. Now it's a zinc paper mill
manufacturing.
up in there.
Yeah.
I think up
I believe that's on Birch Street.
And it's on back of McDonald's up there, And that was sold in 1948, I believe, to some outfit in Memphis, and they're still being made today.
Yeah, see, the Hunter fan was a paddle-type fan for ceilings, and all of a sudden these are very popular. And I believe it's made in Memphis, Tennessee now. They still have the original patents with it.
And they made table fans of various sizes.
They made many different fans.
I have a Hunter table fan, and is it heavy? Wow.
Yeah, it still works probably as well as new though.
It's like you're picking up half a car.
They also had the Butters Armstrong. They owned that. That was the Hunter sulfite mill.
Yeah, and not to mention the Hunter bike,
Yeah, and they make bicycles.
Over in the Fulton Historical Society is one of the...
There's two of them.
Two of them.
They
One
got
of them,
two bicycles over there.
One of them was Clara Wadsworth's. Yeah, that was the other. Well,
I always thought there were just the 500 brothers, but according to the book, the Bofies, there were 6 of them.
There were 6 sons and 1 daughter.
6 of them.
And they all worked in together.
And the youngest one died shortly after they started the Hunterarms. It mentions that in the book.
Yeah. This was a wonderful.
That is show them the picture of the center fold there, the engraved gold gun.
Yeah, it's a wonderful book if anybody is a fan of Hunterarms or Smith guns. And it's L.C. Smith Shotguns by William Brophy. It is the definitive work on Smith guns. And it has everything from the beginning history right to the very end, and some of the finest guns that were ever produced. As I mentioned earlier, Al was wonderful at incorporating various golds into his firearms, 2 or 3 different kinds of gold. And here's an example, for instance, of a gold inlaid Smith gun. And they were the finest, one of the finest firearms ever made in the world. And to this day, here's another fine example. And here's some of their case coloring too. But it was very difficult to get that gold in there and to get it to stay. And here's, for example, of 2 different color golds, as I was mentioning earlier. There's a red, an orange gold, and there's a yellow gold. But Al was such a master at this that he was able to incorporate 4 different colors of gold into his firearms. They were a remarkable gun. The only true weaknesses they seemed to have was, if you can hand me that again,
It was right in the barrel, or not in the barrel, but in the stock.
It was in the stack. As wonderful a gun as it was, the true weakness of a Smith gun was in the stack. It was a little too straight through the wrist, and mainly there wasn't much wood left in through here when you were fitting it, which meant that when you fired the weapon, most of the force of the frame came right back in through here. And the majority of the Smith guns you'll find would have hairline cracks or split through here on their guns. And even the famous pair of guns that they ordered for Clark Gable and Carol Lombard, when they were fitting, there was a pair of crown grades, by the way. They weren't extremely high grade. You would assume an actor like Clark Gable might have had deluxes or specialties or monogram grades or some of the A grades, the higher grades, but instead these were working guns. Clark Gable was a great hunter and sportsman, and he wanted these guns to be able to be taken out and hunted with, not just set on a shelf like the one that John Philip Sousa, the gold gun. And when they were manufacturing Clark Gable's gun, they did pick out for a crown grade. It had high grade wood, but it wasn't as high a grade as a deluxe. But they tried to pick out as fancy a piece of wood as they could get for a crown grade, seeing it was for a movie actor. And the original stack, when they were fitting it, had developed a crack right in through here. So they had at the last minute, it was something like 2 or 3 weeks before he demanded to have delivery of the firearm. So they scrapped that fine piece of wood, and they had to substitute a lesser quality piece of wood in order to make their delivery date. And of course, Clark Gable never realized it at the time. The Hunter brothers and Smith Guns were particularly proud of their wood that they had for their firearms, and they had people who literally scoured the world to find the finest wood blanks possible. They wanted very tight grained walnut so that it wouldn't crack. And also, the tighter the grain of the wood, the better the checkering would take, but particularly on the higher grade guns, like the deluxes and the kind of gun that Garfield Snyder would checker. That wood was just as tight and hard. It was almost like, it would almost look like ebony. It was that tight of grain. Another weakness of the Smith gun was the stock finish on the lower grade guns. The high grade guns like the deluxe and things like that, they had 30, 40 coats of hand rubbed oil. And Sam Sherman, before he died, told me how, in the end, how they would put those hand-finished coats of oil on a deluxe gun. How they would use some pumice powder and a little bit of the oil, and they would rub it in and rub it in and rub it in and rub it in for practically hours, and then wipe it down with a burlap rag. And that took, of course, considerable amount of time. But on a gun that took like a deluxe Smith, which back in 1900 and 1910 and the 20s would run as high as $1,200 to $1,500, which was an astronomical price for a firearm in those days. When you stop and figure what was a Model A Ford or a Model T, you know?
700.
Yeah. And it took probably a week or two to hand build a finish alone on a high-grade gun. But they could afford to do that on a high-grade gun. But on field-grade guns, like I mentioned earlier, where they cost $15 back in the early 1900s, they had to come up with a fairly attractive, fairly quick finish, stock finish. And I think it was Al Van Sanford mentioned to me that in the stocking room there, they had a huge 5-gallon jar, or was it you, Bob, that was telling me? And they had their finish on the field grade and an ideal grade, and even this finish right here. What it consisted of is they had boiled linseed oil, shellac, and turpentine. And what they would do is they would put that finish on, and it would dry and they had drying ovens, of course, where they hang them, and they could build up this finish fairly quick. The only trouble with it is, as anybody knows who's familiar with wood finish, is shellac is not a very good finish for anything exposed to moisture. And as long as your gun was kept inside and used on only dry weather, it was very good. But as soon as you took it out and, say, a duck boat or something like that, the finish would invariably lift. So almost every Smith gun you will see what may have 100% of the blue, bright blue, which was a wonderful blue finish they were able to put on their guns, where we were known.
We didn't cover that, did we?
No, we didn't get into blue and brown. If you want, mention that, Bob.
Yeah, that the gun barrels and the old Smiths, the Hunterarms built, they had this Frank Cordonier family had the patent on this finish that they put on the barrels. And in the pictures, I think there's one here that shows where they blocked the end of the barrels.
Yeah, I think it's
with wooden plugs. There it is, right there. If you look at the gun barrel standing against the bench, you'll see wooden plugs there. And that's would keep this acid from going down into the gun barrel. And what it was is acetic acid and logwood. In other words, like a black finish to give it the color. And it's nothing more than a rusting process. But it took 4 days to do it. The first day they would put it on, it would just turn red for the metal. They put it in a steam cabinet with some moisture. So it would deliberately rust it. Then the next day, they take that gun barrel out and they run it on a wire wheel. Take all that rust off. And you would have a black surface. Just like if you spill Coca-Cola or something on metal, it'll turn it black. This was basically the same process. They just repeat that. Until you got to the 4th day, you had a finish that was just about indestructible. You could take it out in the weather, and the water would never affect it. You could lay your gun against the fence, and you wouldn't scratch it, because it was part of the metal. And when Marlin came here, they bought that patent, Frank Cordonier. And he stayed and set them up to get them going. But that 4 days, they couldn't wait for it. They had to have their guns right away. But when they shut down, they had so much trouble with the gun barrels blowing that they hired a guy to stay over about a year. And the 5,000 guns they did have upstairs, they stripped them all and put the old Browning on. They went back to it.
No,
2 years later, they wished they had 5,000 more guns because that's what they needed. It was that dew light on the barrel. And they were told time and time again by the old gunmen that this stuff was no good because it would eat the solder out of the barrels.
Yep, and the barrels would separate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, the barrels wouldn't separate, but your ribs come loose.
The rib would come off, yeah.
Ribs come loose.
Yeah.
See, Marlin made nothing but solid metal. You could put dew light on a couple coats, it would stay.
Did we mention when Marlin took over Hunterarms? And
Well, I don't think we did
No.
mention that. But they came in, it was in the court hands, bankruptcy court. But there was a group around town that wanted the gunworks to stay here. And they tried to raise money to take it over, and they just couldn't get the money.
No.
But Marlin promised that they would stay here, but they just didn't.
Used as a write-off, I
But there was, yeah. But today, there'd have been all kinds of federal money and grants and this and that and everything else to keep them here.
Yeah, would be
Because it was about 200 jobs it took out.
Yeah. I heard that same story you did, how they kept the man on for over a year to redo those barrels.
Yeah.
And no matter.
Lots of payment.
Yeah,
You know, but till you have the polish out, to just buff, they have two lighters, just
yeah.
come right off. I mean, it was like a coat of cheap paint on there.
It's amazing, hitting the gun shows that I do throughout the country. You will see almost every Smith gun you get your hands on. The bluing will be absolutely spectacular. The case coloring, of course, that was a design fault of the case coloring, not a design fault, but I mean an inherent factor of it. If it was exposed to sunlight, the color case hardening would come off, would wear off, and it would turn to like
It would bleach out.
It would bleach out to like a nickel silver finish. And it was still very attractive. A lot of the Smith guns you see, it looked like they had a nickel finish or receiver or something
They
like
did
that.
have.
Yeah, yeah.
Gentlemen,
One you brought up to me, kinda.
Yeah.
gentlemen,
That was a
our
nickel.
time is almost up, and I want to thank you for your time, Rich.
That
and
was made in
Bob.
Syracuse, you know.
The nickel finish.
That gun.
Excuse me, Bob, time is up.
Time is up.
All right. Thank you,
All right.
Ferd. Thank the town of Volley for the use of their hall here, and I think we'll get together again and have
Yeah, there's
another one. I'm
there's
sure
another
we've
hour
got
right
plenty
on
of,
Crouch.
I think
Yeah,
there was
another
two
hour is like
others,
trout.
from
Yeah.
our area that worked there too.
Who?
Didn't Amos Du Bois?
Yeah,
and-
yeah,
And
Amos Du Bois
Harold
did.
Hubbard also.
Yeah.
Yes.
Which is from
Yeah.
this area.
Harold Hubbard.
I don't know if there are any others, but I do.
And
know that
you
there
were,
was.
and you grew up in the Hubbard,
Well, there
Is that
was
right? The-
about
I
five
went
or
to
six
Hubbard Schoolhouse.
Hubbard
from Mount
Schoolhouse,
Pleasant
right, yeah,
that worked
right.
at the gunwork. They all rode together.
Yeah, came in together.
They all
Yes.
came in together.
Yeah.
okay. Okay.
Oh, thank
Thank
you
you again. That's the most interesting. I've had a wonderful education here.
Yeah, well, it was great coming.
Well, thank you so much, Rich, for